I'm Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started, I've got to give you a legal disclaimer. The Florida Bar Association says I have to tell you that this isn't legal advice, but nothing will ever prevent me from giving you easy to understand information and an overview of the disability insurance world, the games that carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So off we go. Do you have ME/CFS syndrome? If so, today's podcast is for you. If not, I still think there are lessons that you can learn from this podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about 4 things. The first thing is going to be ME/CFS syndrome and the 8 common reasons why ME/CFS claims get denied. 2, evidence, examinations, and carrier reactions to ME/CFS syndrome, part 1. Evidence, examinations, carrier reactions to ME/CFS fatigue syndrome, part 2. And in conclusion, ME/CFS and its relationship to COVID-19 disability claims. We've got a lot to cover, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. This is an episode chock full of information, and we're going to keep on going. Let's talk about the evidence, examination, and carrier's reaction to ME/CFS claims, part 1. Now, I've talked about the objective evidence of your diagnosis issue. ME/CFS generally has no universally agreed upon diagnostic criteria. And what the disability carriers will use is an outdated CDC definition. And according to that definition, you have to have significantly lowered ability to participate in activities that were routine before the onset of the condition and persisting for more than 6 months. Physical or mental activity that causes worsening of symptoms that would not have happened before, sleep disturbance, a constellation of symptoms that can't be explained by any other clinical diagnosis. Now, then they're going to be looking at some other factors. They're going to be looking at whether or not you have difficulty with thinking and memory, worsening problems with sitting or standing, muscle pain, joint pain, or headache pain, tender lymph nodes in the neck or armpits, night sweats, or sensitivity to foods, odors, chemicals, or noise. Now, they're also going to be applying this objective evidence test to restrictions and limitations. So they're going to cherry pick the medical records to see whether or not you have any of these complaints. And then they're going to look for the objective evidence of restrictions and limitations. Where's that evidence going to come from? Well, it potentially can come from the statements that you make to the disability carrier on a phone call or on a phone call check-in. It can be found in the statements that you make on your activity of daily living forms. It can be coming from statements of your supervisors or coworkers. It can be coming from supportive medical records from your physician. It can also come from the APS statement that you will get from your physician, or even Social Security disability forms, such as a residual functional capacity form for ME/CFS. It can come from a functional capacity evaluation, a CPET exam, neurocognitive testing, an independent examination, and a vocational report, and maybe even a Social Security decision. But you got to be careful about that because of mental health issues. So those are sources that either you can submit or they'll be looking for not only an objective basis of the diagnosis, but objective basis of the restrictions and limitations. Now, I've talked before about the importance of a CPET examination in an ME/CFS case. Why? Well, as I've told you before, they're going to argue that there is no objective basis for the diagnosis, notwithstanding the fact that ME/CFS can't be established through objective medical evidence. Courts are generally not impressed with that argument at all. But as I've said before, the next argument that they're going to make is that your records don't support a level of impairment that would prevent you from being entitled to your benefits, because you can't do the material and substantial duties of your own occupation or any other occupation. So the way to solve that is to get a CPET exam, because that CPET exam can objectively measure fatigue and other symptoms that could interfere with your ability to work. But you need to understand that there are two types of CPET exams. There's a 1-day and a 2-day, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each. Regardless of which one you get, they can be hard to obtain because there are very few facilities that will perform these. Now, the 1-day CPET can be obtained by from a cardiologist or an exercise physiologist. I'm leery about testing done by a cardiologist because, quite frankly, they're not as sympathetic as to why you're getting the testing as an exercise physiologist. The exercise physiologist, I think, is better qualified because they understand the impact of exercise and fatigue on a person's ability to work from the person's totality of their situation, where cardiologists will just sort of tend to focus on potentially fatigue issues and not deal with the other issues such as pain or dysfunction, the impact of other medical conditions. So I prefer a CPET exam done by an exercise physiologist. But the problem with a 1-day CPET exam is that it rarely addresses the major problem in ME/CFS cases, which is the post-exertional malaise. That's why I think you're probably better off getting the more expensive 2-day CPET. It can, as I said, be difficult to find one, and you may have to go to New York, Washington State, California, or even Florida where testing can be done. And I understand that adds to the expense. So you probably should be consulting with an experienced ERISA disability attorney before you do the CPET exam, because they can tell you who to use and explain to you why you might need a 1-day or a 2-day exam. Now, there are situations where my clients will have a 2-day CPET exam scheduled, but they don't pass the first day. And as a result, we don't have to do the second day. But if you pass the first day, then we definitely need the second day because we want to document the fatigue and cognitive issues. Now, what is the disability carrier's common response to a CPET exam? They will, quite frankly, look for ways to discredit the exam. And the first way they will do it is to say, well, it's not time relevant because it doesn't address the functionality at the time the claim was denied. And I don't really think that courts buy that argument, in part because disability carriers do IMEs all the time after the time cases have been denied. So you can't argue that out of both sides of your mouth. Now, if that doesn't work, what they're going to argue is that the CPET exam was not supported by the physical examination conducted by the treating physicians, the level of treatment provided, or the nature of the treatment recommendations. I always want to get my treating physician to sign off on the CPET exam results. And now, the last argument they're going to make is that the CPET is not objective evidence of impairment because it's based on subjective information supplied by the policyholder. And I don't think that that argument goes, quite frankly, very far with the courts, who have recognized the CPET exam as the gold standard examination or study to document the existence of ME/CFS, but also the level of restrictions and limitations. Got it? All right, let's take a quick break before we come back and talk about part 2 of evidence examination and carrier reactions to ME/CFS syndrome claims.